such. We are all conscious in this Parliament, or we should be, of how the job of First Lord of the Treasury evolved in Britain, steadily developing a grip over other cabinet departments previously independent of it, and developing into the post of Prime Minister. The creation of that job took many years, and the Prime Minister probably feels that it took almost as long to get round to his turn to hold it. But to see how the post of a permanent President of the European Council could also evolve is not difficult even for the humblest student of politics, and it is, of course, rumoured that one Tony Blair may now be interested in the job. Now, if that makes us uncomfortable on these benches, just imagine how it is viewed in Downing Street. And I must warn ministers opposite that, having tangled with Tony Blair across this dispatch box on literally hundreds of occasions, I know his mind almost as well as they do. I can tell them that when he goes off to a major political conference of a centre-right party and simultaneously refers to himself as a socialist, he is on manoeuvres. And he is busily building coalitions as only he can. And we can all picture the scene at a European Council sometime next year. Picture the face of our poor Prime Minister as the name of Blair is placed in nomination by one President and Prime Minister after another. The look of utter gloom on his face. The nauseating, glutinous praise oozing from every head of government. The rapid revelation of a majority view agreed behind closed doors when he was, as usual, excluded. Never would he regret more no longer being in possession of a veto. The famous drop jaw almost hitting the table as he realises there is no option but to join in. And then the awful moment when the motorcade of the President of Europe sweeps into Downing Street. The gritted teeth and bitten nails, the Prime Minister emerging from his door with a smile of intolerable anguish, the choking sensation as the words "Mr. President" are forced out of his mouth. And then once in the cabinet room, the melodrama of "When will you hand over to me?" all over again. There is, of course, a serious point here, Madam Deputy Speaker.
How on earth are the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England, commending the hard AQ as they strive to do, to be taken as serious participants in the debate against that kind of background noise? Mr. Speaker, I believe that both the Chancellor and the Governor are cricketing enthusiasts, so I hope there's no monopoly of cricketing metaphors. It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain. The point, Mr. Speaker, is perhaps more sharply put by a British businessman trading in Brussels and elsewhere who wrote to me last week. People throughout Europe, he said, see our Prime Minister's finger wagging and hear her passionate "no, no, no," much more clearly than the content of the carefully worded formal texts. It is too easy, he went on, for them to believe that we all share her attitudes. For why else, he asked, has she been our Prime Minister for so long? This is, my correspondent concluded, a desperately serious situation for our country. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, I have to agree. The tragedy is, and it is for me personally, for my party, for our whole people, and for my right honourable friend herself, a very real tragedy. But the Prime Minister's perceived attitude towards Europe is running increasingly serious risks for the future of our nation. It risks minimising our influence and maximising our chances of being once again shut out. We've paid heavily in the past for late starts and squandered opportunities in Europe. We dare not let that happen again. If we detach ourselves completely, as a party or as a nation, from the middle ground of Europe, the effects will be incalculable and very hard ever to correct. Mr. Speaker, in my letter of resignation, which I tendered with the utmost sadness and dismay, I said that cabinet government is all about trying to persuade one another from within. That was my commitment to government by persuasion, persuading colleagues and the nation. I've tried to do that as Foreign Secretary and since. But I realize now that the task has become futile, of trying to stretch the meaning of words beyond what was credible, of trying to pretend there was a common policy when every step forward risked being subverted by some casual comment or impulsive answer. The conflict of loyalty to my right honourable friend the Prime Minister, and after more than 2 decades together, that instinct of loyalty is still very real, and of loyalty to what I perceive to be the true interest of this nation, that conflict of loyalty has become all too great. I no longer believe it possible to resolve that conflict from within this government. That is why I have resigned. In doing so, I have done what I believe to be right for my party and my country. The time has come for others to consider their own response to the tragic conflict of loyalties with which I have myself wrestled for perhaps too long.
And especially since the end of the war, the processes which gave birth to the nation-states of Europe have been repeated all over the world. We have seen the awakening of national consciousness in peoples who have for centuries lived in dependence upon some other power. 15 years ago, this movement spread through Asia. Many countries there, of different races and civilizations, pressed their claim to an independent national life. Today, the same thing is happening in Africa. And the most striking of all the impressions that I have formed since I left London a month ago is of the strength of this African national consciousness. In different places, it takes different forms, but it is happening everywhere. The wind of change is blowing through this continent, and whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. And we must all accept it as a fact. And our national policies must take account of it.
I wouldn't like to miss out the right honourable gentleman, the Secretary of State for Industry, who's had such a tremendous effect upon the government and our politics altogether. And as I see the right honourable gentleman walking around the country, looking puzzled and forlorn and wondering what's happened, I've often tried to remember what he reminds me of. And the other day I hit upon it, because I recall that in my youth, when I used to go in Plymouth, yes, I know, quite a time ago, we'll come to that one in a moment too, but I used to go, when I lived in Plymouth, every Saturday night along to the Palace Theatre, and the favourite I always used to watch there was a magician conjurer, and they used to have in the audience, dressed up as one of the most prominent aldermen in the place, a person who was sitting at the back of the audience. And the magician conjurer would come forward and say that he wanted to have from the audience a beautiful watch. And he would go amongst the audience, he'd go up to the alderman, and eventually take off him a marvellous gold watch. And he'd bring it right back onto the stage. He'd enfold it in a beautiful red handkerchief. He placed it on the table there in front of us, he took up his mallet and he hit it, smashed to smithereens. And then, on his countenance would come exactly the puzzled look of the Right Honourable Gentleman. And he would step forward. And he would step forward. He would step forward right to it. He'd step forward right to the front of the stage and he'd say, "I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I've forgotten the rest of the trick." And that's the situation of the government. That's the situation of the government. They've forgotten the rest of the trick.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed. Yet I cannot believe that there is anything more or anything different that I could have done and that would have been more successful. Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honourable settlement between Germany and Poland. But Hitler would not have it. He had evidently made up his mind to attack Poland whatever happened. And although he now says he put forward reasonable proposals which were rejected by the Poles, that is not a true statement. The proposals were never shown to the Poles, nor to us. And though they were announced in the German broadcast on Thursday night, Hitler did not wait to hear comments on them, but ordered his troops to cross the Polish frontier the next morning. His action shows convincingly that there is no chance of expecting that this man will ever give up his practice of using force to gain his will. He can only be stopped by force. And we and France are today, in fulfillment of our obligations, going to the aid of Poland, who is so bravely resisting this wicked and unprovoked attack upon her people. We have a clear conscience. We have done all that any country could do to establish peace. But a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, has become intolerable. And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage.
I finish just by saying this. War is an easy thing to talk about. There are not many people of the generation that remember it. The Right Honourable Gentleman served with distinction in the last war. I never killed anyone, but I wore uniform. But I was in London in the Blitz in 1940, living in the Millbank Tower where I was born. Some different ideas have come in since. And every night I went down to the shelter in Thames House. Every morning I saw Dockland burning. 500 people were killed in Westminster one night by a landmine. It was terrifying. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? What fools we are to live in a generation for which war is a computer game for our children and just an interesting little Channel 4 news item. Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion
will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now, that's for their decision to take. But this is a quite unique debate in my parliamentary experience, where we're asked to share responsibility for a decision we won't really be taking, with consequences for people who have no part to play in the brutality of the regime which we are dealing with. And I finish with this. On October the 24th, 1945, and the former Prime Minister from Bexley, Old Sidcup, will remember it, the United Nations Charter was passed. And the words of that charter etched into my mind and move me even as I think of them. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save future generations, succeeding generations, from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has caused untold suffering to mankind. That was the pledge of that generation to this generation, and it would be the greatest betrayal of all if we voted to abandon the Charter and take unilateral action and pretend we were doing it in the name of the international community. And I shall vote against the motion for the reasons that I've given the House.
Now the experience itself. 3.5 years ago, when they were urging us to go in, oh, what a campaign it was. You've got to get in to get on, was the slogan of that day. £5 or £6 a week better off for Britain if we can only get into the common market. All the goodies were spread out, and Donald Stokes of Leyland buying one-page advertisements saying, all we need is a great domestic market of 250 million, and we will sweep Europe. And you know what has happened, and this is the one significance of the trade figure. I'm not arguing who cares about the actual details of the size. That doesn't matter. It's the trend. The trend. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we were almost in balance with the common market countries. What's happened since? 500 million down in 72, 1,000 million in 73, 2,000 million in 74, running now at the rate of 2,400 million this year. Don't you see what that's going to do to the prosperity of this country? You can't go on borrowing that. And then you add to that the burdens I mentioned a moment ago, and we are under great threat. We're in peril at the present time, and the country must know it. And therefore, now what do they say? What is the message that comes now? No longer to tell the British people about the goodies that lie there. No longer that. That won't wash, will it? Because the evidence will no longer support it. And so the message that comes out is fear, fear, fear. Fear because you won't have any food. Fear of unemployment. Fear that we've somehow been so reduced as a country that we can no longer, as it were, totter about in the world independent as a nation. And a constant attrition of our morale, a constant attempt to tell us that what we have, and what we have is not only our own achievement, but what generations of Englishmen have helped us to achieve, is not worth a damn. The kind of laughter that greeted the early references that I made, that what was involved was the transfer of the whole of our democratic system to others. Not a damn. Well, I tell you, what we now have to face in Britain, what the whole argument is about, now that the fraud and the promise has been exposed, what it's about is basically the morale and the self-confidence of our people. We can shape our future. We are 55 million people. If you look around the world today, I listen to Gough Whitlam and his 14 million Australians, and he trades heavily with Japan. I'm very fond of the Australians. But do you think he's going to enter into a relationship with Japan, which gives Japan the right to make the laws in Australia? Do you think Canada, 22 million of them, and to the south, a great and friendly nation? Yes, they are. But do you think Canada is going to allow its laws to be written by the 200 million people in some union in America? No, of course not. The whole thing is an absurdity. And therefore I urge you to reject it. I urge you to say no to this motion. And I urge the whole British country to say no on Thursday in the referendum.
The great air battle which has been in progress over this island for the last few weeks has recently attained a high intensity. It is too soon to attempt to assign limits either to its scale or to its duration. We must certainly expect that greater efforts will be made by the enemy than any he has put forth. Hostile airfields are still being developed in France and the Low Countries, and the movement of squadrons and material for attacking us is still proceeding. It is quite plain, sir, that Herr Hitler could not admit defeat in his air attack on Great Britain without sustaining most serious injury. If, after all his boastings and blood-curdling threats and lurid accounts trumpeted round the world of the damage he has inflicted, of the vast numbers of our air force he has shot down, so he says, with so little loss to himself, if after tales of the panic-stricken British crushed in their holes, cursing the plutocratic parliament which has led them to such a plight, if after all this his whole air onslaught were forced, after a while, tamely to peter out, the Führer's reputation for veracity of statement might be seriously impugned. We may be sure, therefore, that he will continue, as long as he has the strength to do so, and as long as any preoccupations he may have in respect of the Russian Air Force allow him to do so. On the other hand, the conditions and course of the fighting have so far been favorable to us. I told the House 2 months ago that whereas in France our fighter aircraft were wont to inflict a loss of 2 or 3 to 1 upon the Germans, and in the fighting at Dunkirk, which was a kind of no man's land, a loss of about 3 or 4 to 1, we expected that in an attack on this island we should achieve a larger ratio. This has certainly come true. It must also be remembered that all the enemy machines and pilots which are shot down over our island or over the seas which surround it are either destroyed or captured, whereas a considerable proportion of our machines and also of our pilots are saved and soon again, in many cases, come into action. The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
And I do believe that he and his party have made an error in the way in which they propose to vote tonight. That is, of course, if they adhere to their apparent resolution. But I must say this to the right honourable gentleman, however misguided he may be in seeking to vote as he proposed in the same lobby with those who are most bitterly opposed to the establishment of a Scottish Assembly, I must say that I think those who listen to him and who've seen what may happen later, they must acknowledge the remarkable allegiance which the right honourable gentleman commands from his followers on that bench. It's one of the wonders of the world. There's been nothing quite like it since the armies of ancient Rome used to march into battle, and it's only now that we've seen the right honourable gentleman in his full imperial guise. Hail Caesar! Those about to die, salute thee. That is the way in which he has led his followers on this occasion. Which brings me also to the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the Liberal Party. He knows I wouldn't like to miss him out at all. And here I'm sure I'll elicit the support and sympathy of the right honourable lady, because she and I have always shared a common interest in the development of this young man, haven't we?
absolutely. Yes, we follow. So I'm just wondering, and I'm very glad if the Right Honourable Lady's got something to say on the matter, I'll be happy to give way to her in a second. But I'm just wondering exactly, and I'm sure the whole of the rest of the House and the country would like to know, my Right Honourable friend referred to it in somewhat other terms a little earlier today, what did happen exactly on last Thursday night? I don't want to misconstrue anything. Did she send for him or did he send for her? Or did they just do it by billet doux, carried by... Cupid has already been unmasked. Cupid, who... one of the first chief whips I've ever seen who can blush. And I say to him... I think he's got every right to blush. Anyone who was responsible for arranging this most grisly of assignations has got a lot to answer for. But that brings me to the Right Honourable Lady, because it is perfectly clear. It is perfectly clear that the Right Honourable Lady, and I've never never in this House or elsewhere, as far as I know, said anything discourteous to her, and I never intend to do so. I do not believe that that is the way in which politics should be conducted. Yes, I believe that. It doesn't mean we can't exchange occasional pleasantries, that's right. And what the Right Honourable Lady has done, and I've seen it, marked it myself, what she is doing today is leading her troops into battle, snugly concealed behind a Scottish nationalist shield, with the boy David holding her hand. Quite a And I must say to the Right Honourable Lady, who, I'd like her to smile for once. I'd like her to smile. I say to the... Perhaps I could say to the Right Honourable Lady, I'm even more concerned about the fate of the Right Honourable Gentleman than about her. She can look after herself. But here, the leader of the Liberal Party, I say this in the utmost affection, but he's passed from rising hope to elder statesman without any intervening period whatsoever. And it is in that...
We are told, sir, that Herr Hitler has a plan for invading the British Isles. This has often been thought of before. When Napoleon lay at Boulogne for a year with his flat-bottom boats and his grand army, he was told by someone, there are bitter weeds in England. There are certainly a great many more of them since the British Expeditionary Force returned. Sir, I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made, as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. At any rate, that is what we are going to try to do. That is the resolve of His Majesty's government, every man of them. That is the will of Parliament and the nation. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
Implausible promises don't win victories. I'll tell you what happens with impossible promises. You start with far-fetched resolutions. They are then pickled into a rigid dogma, a code. And you go through the years sticking to that, outdated, misplaced, irrelevant to the real needs, and you end in the grotesque chaos of a Labour council hiring taxis to scuttle around a city, handing out redundancy notices to its own workers. I'm telling you, no matter how entertaining, how fulfilling the short-term egos, I tell you, and you listen, I'm telling you, you can't play politics with people's jobs and with people's services. The voice of the people, not the people here, the voice of the real people with real needs is louder than all the boos that can be assembled. Understand that, please, comrades, in your socialism, in your commitment to those people. Understand it. The people will not, cannot abide posturing. They can't respect the gestured generals or the tendency tacticians. Comrades, it seems to me lately that some of our number become like sort of latter-day public school boys. It seems it matters not whether you won or lost, but how you played the game. We can't take that inspiration from Rudyard Kipling. Because I owe this party everything I've got, not the job, not being leader of the Labour Party. I owe this party every life chance I've had from the time I was a child. A life chance. The life chance of a comfortable home with working parents, people who had jobs. A life chance of moving out of a pest and damp infested set of rooms into a decent home built by a Labour council under a Labour government. The life chance of an education that went on for as long as I wanted to take it. Me and millions of others of my generation got all their chances from this movement. That's what we've got to win. Not for our sakes, but really, truly, to deliver the British people from evil. Let's do it.
I have always voted against the televising of the proceedings of this House. And I expect that I always will. The brief intervention of the honourable gentleman, the member for Bradford South, did nothing to alter my views. Despite the strongly held opinions which I have on these matters, I received a letter 3 weeks ago. I believe that a copy was sent to each of us and possibly even to you, Mr. Speaker, which made the following preposterous assertion, and I quote, "The impression you make on television depends mainly on your image, 55%, with your voice and body language accounting for 38% of your impact. Only 7% depends on what you are actually saying." I thought that I should enlist the sympathy of the opposition with that last proposition. The letter went on, and you may think that this was an extravagant claim so far as myself is concerned, but the letter went on, "We can guarantee to improve your appearance." Through a personal and confidential image consultation, you will learn if you need a new hairstyle, and where to get it, and the type of glasses to suit your face. The House will understand why I consider that I was beyond redemption on all counts.